Hey, it's Sam, and I'm speaking today more about the blind spots, projections, shadows, astrology course that's coming up. It's going to be an excellent way for you to understand your difficulties astrologically. Again, one of the main things that I've been talking about was the shadow side of each of the planets, of the signs, and particularly recently talking about with all the planets, the question arises, well, how do you know when a planet is more likely to be operating more at that denser, sort of darker level? And one of the main reasons or one of the main ways we can see that astrologically is to examine what's called the Jagraadadi Avasthas. There are two, they're called Avasthas, that relate to the dignity of the planet. Now, dignity is a very simple but powerful calculation that shows how much consciousness is operating with the planet. It literally talks about how much awareness, Jagrad, which means awake, how awake the energy is, whether it's awake, whether it's kind of dreaming, like in a kind of normal dreaming state like we are most of the time, or whether it's asleep and unconscious like we're going to be talking about in that course. Again, the blind spots, the unconsciousness, the things where we project the negativity onto others as well. And one of the main ways to look at it are planets that are unconscious or debilitated or in a dark state where they're in a great enemy dignity or debilitated state especially. Now again, I want you to understand that doesn't mean that everything happens as bad. I always use the example, one of the main examples, someone like Einstein had debilitated Mercury, yet he was one of the greatest geniuses ever because of other things. But it still was an unconscious energy where it was harder. That particular planet of Mercury and what it brings out was dark and confusing for him, especially to bring it out into a kind of normal life. And so, particularly as it related to certain things in his life, you saw the difficulty. But because it had other factors, which are called Neecha, Banga, it wound up also being a benefit. So again, nothing is simple and one-dimensional, and we'll talk about that in the course. But it's very important to understand, in a more mundane sense, how planets in that lower dignity can be difficult and can really show this kind of shadowy, confusing energy. And it means that typically we tend to experience it through the struggle and the pain and the problem when the planet is in a debilitated state. Especially it comes out in a way that's confusing, that again tends to be a bit unconscious, where it's awake state when it's like, let's say, especially at its highest state when it's exalted or in its own sign, it's more integrated, whereas it's a great source of knowledge for us. When it's in a debilitated state or an unconscious state, we get knowledge, but we get knowledge of it through our painful mistakes, through again its struggles, the struggles that come through it. And so we really can identify with the struggle, and we can act out in a way that brings that kind of struggle and sort of project that kind of dark quality onto others, but just in general. And it makes it harder to experience that thing without feeling the severity and the deficit, right? So again, I have it here on the screen. It says, this is right from the Planetary source, Parashara. It says, awakening, dreaming, and sleeping states. If a Grah is in its own Rashi or exaltation, it is said to be in a state of awakening or alertness. That's called Jagrad. If the Rashi is of a friend or of a neutral, it's in the dreaming state, while in an enemy Rashi or in debilitation, it's in the state of sleeping. According to a Grah being in awaking, dreaming, or sleeping states, the results will be full, medium, or nil. So it says nil, meaning when it's in the debilitated or the dark state, it's like its effects will be nil. Again, these are extreme languages, but essentially it's reaffirming what I'm saying. And you again think of it as being awake, sort of dreaming or average or unconscious. When the planets are in their highest states, we actually wind up sort of teaching those energies. It winds up being very, again, very conscious in us. It doesn't mean we don't make mistakes with it. We all make all the mistakes. It just means we don't keep repeating them when the planet is in its highest state. It means that we also can see through other people's mistakes with it, again, because it's more awake in us. Just like if you're awake to something or you're more mature with something, you see the way children act. Because you're older and you've been through that, you're like, okay, they're doing this. And we can see the motivations with the energies that are more awake in us, that are more exalted. We sort of become a teacher of that thing, right? When it's unconscious, debilitated, or what have you, we learn through painful mistakes, right? And we still learn it, but again, and we can tend to spread that kind of darkness and project it, and all those sort of blind spots, like we said, are there, and we don't see the blind spots. We're kind of blinded by the unconscious quality. So, of course, the sun is debilitated in Libra, moon in Scorpio, Mars in Cancer, Mercury in Pisces, Jupiter in Capricorn, Venus in Virgo, and Saturn in Aries, right? So again, in the course, I'm going to go over each one, how each one creates a blind spot, right? And the opposite, the exaltation, brings out the awareness. And you can see that opposite. And again, one of the big things in the course I'm going to talk about are these oppositions as well. Exaltation and debilitation points are naturally points of contrast and opposition, right? And sometimes you'll even have debilitated planets aspecting each other because they're in places opposite. Particularly Saturn and Saturn and the Sun can be debilitated and opposite. So it can even compound it. Jupiter and Mars also can be debilitated and aspecting each other. For example, you could have Jupiter in Capricorn aspecting Mars in Cancer. You could have Saturn in Aries aspecting the Sun in Libra. They're opposite as well. So it could really be a kind of axis of kind of blindness, projection. You could also have exchanging. You can have, there's one example where Mars and the Moon can be exchanging with each other while they're debilitated. And again, it can sort of compound the sort of confusion where these things can kind of spiral on each other. So there's another set of Avasthas as well that then show how those planets feel in those dignities. Those are called Tadia Avasthas, and it gives specific indications, especially feelings, of how the planets feel when they're in those states. Exaltation is radiant, own sign is confident, great friend is rejoicing, friend is serene, neutral is scarce, enemy is miserable, great enemy is suffering cruelty, and debilitated is alarmed, like afraid, like alarmed. So when planets get in that state, they're kind of like in that alarmed state, right? Whatever it might be. Like if it's Jupiter debilitated, it's alarmed about, maybe I won't find what inspires me. Maybe there is no hope. Maybe there's no hope for me. If it's something's making noise. If it's Mars, it's, maybe there is, maybe I have no strength. Maybe I'm just powerless after all. Maybe it's true. Maybe I'm powerless after all. And they're alarmed about it. If it's Mercury, maybe I'm just confused and stupid and don't know what I'm doing. And it's kind of like, oh no. Many times with Mercury and Venus, though, in their debilitated states, there's a strong Neecha Banga because the other one is there. So Venus brings Neecha Banga onto Mercury. Mercury brings Neecha Banga onto Venus because they're always very close to each other. Particularly Venus. But I'll talk about that a little more in the course. But with Saturn debilitated, it's like, oh no, maybe I'm going to die. Maybe I don't have any, structure. Maybe I'm all alone. And, right? Because Saturn is terrified of, maybe being alone and having to, grow up or take things seriously or face the harsh realities that aren't so harsh. And Sun is like, maybe I'm totally weak and powerless, because again, the Sun is confidence, power. Libra is where it's debilitated. So again, maybe I have no power at all. I'm powerless. And it's kind of like alarmed about it, and just like, you can just, kind of freak out. So again, obviously that's a blind spot. When we're in sort of panicky, then we're not very wise, right? And so these are very important to see. And there's a couple charts I have. Let me pull this in here a little bit. Right now, as I'm recording this in July of 2021, we're having the Olympics, and we just had this lady, Simone Biles, this gymnast, who has shockingly retired from the Olympics due to, she's calling it, mental health concerns, really stress about performance anxiety, and things like that. And I looked up her chart. I just wanted to see. I don't have a birth time, so I'm not sure if this time is right, but we see a debilitated Jupiter here. And I wanted to see what was showing it. And in the sky right now, as this is happening, Saturn in the sky is going right over it. Her debilitated Jupiter. In the sky right now, Saturn is going over it. She also has a powerful moon, and Rahu is going over it. So Rahu is another planet that really, Rahu and Ketu are very crucial in this shadows, blind spots, projections, darkness, fear, stress, worry, that we'll be talking about over the weekend. So again, I wasn't surprised to see that she has that. She also has debilitated Mercury, and it's joined Ketu, the south node, right? And it's opposite Mars, which is retrograde with you, so you can see it's very close as well. So the lunar nodes, the nodal axis is joined to debilitated Mercury, and Ketu is there, and Mercury is also debilitated. Now there's no transits going over that, but we don't know her. I don't have her exact birth time, so I don't know exactly how this is playing out with her dashas. But we see two debilitated planets. One of them is getting this transit right now of Saturn right in the sky over it. The other one, she has this exalted moon, and Rahu is going over it. So you also see, again, whether it's exalted or not, the moon is our emotions and our emotional state. So you can see the kind of stress and worry and panic. And by the way, whether someone likes it or not, she's getting exalted in her own way for making the choice to drop out, right? She's getting some criticism as well, but a lot of people in the media are saying this is the best thing that she's done because she needs to take care of her mental health, and it's bringing awareness to athletes and how all the pressure that they're under. So it's kind of like a transcendent moment for her as well. And so one could easily say that this is the sign of an exalted moon, caring for herself rather than ignoring her feelings. And Rahu going over that exalted moon is also, again, you're seeing this as a power. It's not a blind spot. It's an awake spot. You see, because she's awake to her feelings, right? But perhaps those primal fears, especially this Jupiter, is big. Because Jupiter in Capricorn, Jupiter's debilitated in Capricorn because it's where we tend to lose hope. Jupiter gives us hope, inspiration, purpose. There's a sense of purpose and meaning to what I'm doing. That's what Jupiter is. It's debilitating in Capricorn because we're like, well, I don't know what the meaning is and the purpose is, because everything is hard work and stress, and ultimately we're all going to die anyway. Again, that's a pretty bleak assessment of Saturn, but it's how it feels to Jupiter. And so she's really felt the stress and pressure. So even just having Jupiter there is one thing, but having Saturn in the sky going over it, really powerful Saturn, is bringing out the sort of hopelessness. like, or a lack of purpose. Like, what's the point of doing this? And she was also, it's dangerous for a gymnast because they're twisting up in the air and they could come down and, crack your skull, break your neck. It's obviously dangerous. And she dropped out. I saw she did a vault, and you could see halfway, like in midair, she kind of lost herself. She kind of lost what she was doing. The muscle memory of being in the half twist or whatever it was she was doing just kind of disappeared, and she sort of came out of the spin in the middle of it. It looked really bizarre. She's about to do this real twisty thing, and then kind of half into it, her legs just kind of kicked up, and it looked really strange, and she landed really strangely. Luckily, she didn't hurt herself. But that's why she said she wanted to stop. She said she didn't trust herself. So that Saturn bringing this pressure. Saturn brings pressure. When I looked at her chart, I had the instinct of Scorpio, by the way, because Scorpios are little muscular, maybe athletic, but it's not rectified, so I'm not. But it wouldn't surprise me if it was a Scorpio ascendant, with Ketu being in the first house and Rahu going through here, but I don't know that for sure. But there's another famous person who recently did the same thing, and I looked, and it's interesting. Naomi Osaka, tennis player, she's also gotten some headlines because she lost her tennis match also in the Olympics. But besides that, she recently also brought a lot of awareness to mental health and tennis by dropping out of the French Open tennis tournament. And interestingly, they were both born in 1997. They both have the same debilitated Jupiter, almost exact same degree, but 6 months apart. With Naomi Osaka, it had just gone through a retrograde cycle. It was now moving direct, but it had gone through a retrograde cycle and was now going forward again. But Naomi Osaka is getting the same transit. And a couple months ago, she dropped out of the French Open tennis tournament because first she said she didn't want to do press conferences because they were too stressful. And then the French Open said they were going to, I think, fine her for it. And then it brought a lot of attention to her and the whole issue. And then rather than draw all this attention to herself, she just dropped out. She dropped out of the tournament and said she didn't want to be in the tournament and have it be a distraction for all the other players and herself. So she just dropped out. But again, another female athlete drawing attention to the stress of performing at a high level, and again, a debilitated Jupiter. So again, I put this in this kind of blind spot projection, dark stress. I wanted to see if there were debilitated planets or what might be causing this in both of their charts. She also has she has Ketu, Naomi Osaka, going over this Venus-Mars in Scorpio. And she's got Mars in its own sign and Mercury in its own sign as well. So she's got two planets in the awake of Avasthas, right? In the awake of Avasthas, because they're in their own sign. Mercury in its own sign, very late degree though. And Mars in its own sign are in the awake of Avasthas, and Jupiter's in the asleep, unconscious of Avasthas. So here are two case studies of people getting they used to call it the yips in baseball, getting nervous about performing in public to athletes. And they both have this debilitated Jupiter in the same place. So I think it's a good case study. And again, this course on blind spots, projections, is going to be really good. I think it's going to be very helpful to get deeply into the difficulties that we have as human beings. All of us, we make all the mistakes. And now in this day and age, I really just see so much pathologizing and people even using astrology to double down on those things, sadly. And, instead of seeing it as tendencies, and again, we're seeing now this extreme tendency. Obviously, Naomi Osaka has dealt with this pressure her whole life. So has Simone Biles. So why is it happening now? She's had a debilitated Jupiter her whole life. Both of them have. Why in the last couple months, two very high-profile athletes saying, I'm, for mental health reasons and self-care, I'm dropping out. It's unprecedented. We've never seen it before. Both of them have Jupiter at the same degree in Capricorn where Saturn is in the sky right now. Not so coincidental. By the way, here's the chart of the day. Sorry, I should have just brought it up. 1619 Jupiter. This was July 29th. I'm sorry, Saturn 1619 has just gone over both of the Jupiters. This is Osaka and this is Simone Biles. So again, within 1 degree, 1 or 2 degrees of both, and it just passed them. So, but you can see it's very tight aspect here. And in the sky right now as well, we have all of these oppositions in the sky. Look, Jupiter's exactly opposite Mars in the sky. We have these oppositions here as well. Saturn is exactly opposite the Sun. I talked about this in the forecast that I did for the end of July and into August. These oppositions would be huge. So we're seeing that as well. The situation in the sky is also showing the same principle that I talked about with blind spots, projections. And again, these are obviously blind spots coming up with these athletes. They had no idea they were going to suddenly do this, right? And it's this blind fear, stress, and it's stress and fear coming out because of this Saturn on these debilitated planets, right? Bringing the hammer on it, and it's opposite the Sun again here right now. With Simone Biles, this Sun is saying, get out there and perform. And again, it's just bringing this lack of confidence, which is what the Sun is. And by the way, neither the Sun or Mercury are very powerful here either. It's very emotional, right? Very emotional sign. And so she's really following her emotions. This is another reason why I had a feeling it might be it might be Scorpio ascendant. It's quite emotional going on with Simone Biles especially. That's Naomi Osaka, but with Simone Biles thinking that it might be this Scorpio because it's quite an emotional decision, right? So, but this exact aspect and this exact opposition as well, again, showing the opposition, the blind spots really come, this sort of tug of war between two opposite things. And so Mars and Jupiter especially are almost exactly opposite by exact degree, and Saturn and the Sun also. The Sun is moving up to an exact opposition, but it's very tight, what's called orb. In transit astrology, this is a very tight orb, only 4 degrees. So Saturn is exactly opposite the Sun right now. Exactly opposite. So again, it's pulling in opposite directions, and it's the opposition of Capricorn and Cancer. So again, this is how you take it in. You take Saturn is in Capricorn, the Sun is in Cancer. So you take those 2 planets and then you put them in those environments. A very emotional sun, like I feel very, very emotional about my power or my status. This is the Sun. And Saturn in Capricorn is very practical and putting it on it, very practical. Don't mess up. Don't screw up. You might hurt yourself. Everybody's looking, everybody's watching. That's what Saturn brings. So again, you can see this is revealing the blind spots. Blind spots, a lot of it come through oppositions, things that are opposite, things that are dark, like planets in low dignity, right? So see how those things pile up here. It's a planet in very low dignity, getting transited by this, and then the Sun comes, is also opposite. Mars is also opposite Jupiter. Again, it's in Leo, at least Mars is in Leo, Jupiter's in Aquarius. Again, Leo, Aquarius. Leo is like the king and the power, and Aquarius is like the public, the world, right? And it's these are retrograde planets. You can see all these themes lining up with this, even though we don't know her birth chart. We don't know the exact time. And oh yeah, by the way, Rahu 14 degrees over her exalted moon. So again, this is an exalted moon, and her exalted moon, she's getting a lot of praise for honoring her heart. It's an exalted moon saying, look, even though this might be embarrassing and I don't want to let you down, whatnot, but I have to follow what's right for me, follow my mental health, very much the moon. Moon Rahu, again, mental health, moon Rahu, and whatnot. So, very powerful case study in illustrating these principles. So the weekend class, we're going to get down into all of the planets and how all of them show a unique kind of darkness that we're trying to navigate, right? And we all do it, whether the planets are powerful or not. I mean, I have my Mercury in Gemini where it's really powerful, but sometimes it's still in a dark place. It's just not as much because it's very awake. I have Jupiter in Pisces again, so it's very high dignity. It's awake, but sometimes my Jupiter is also messed up because it's going to get an aspect from Saturn. It's going to get a transit from Rahu. Things are going to influence it, right? So no matter what, we all do all of it. It's just when the planets are in better dignity and in higher dignity, we don't get pulled down as much, and we don't hang out there as long. And we usually can see through it after a while. We learn from the mistake much more easily. The ones that are unconscious in the difficult dignities, we tend to only learn from them through painful lessons often. So I hope this was helpful. Go ahead and register for the course. There's also 2 great bonus classes that you get. One from Dr. Malini Iyer about relationships. These are available right now if you're seeing this before the course. And another from Alex Klayman on the lunar nodes. We're going to talk a lot about the nodes over the weekend, so you check that out.